Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, the master of fun and wonder, Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett, and welcome to this, another episode of Robservations. Robservations number 225, for those keeping score. I'm certainly not, but welcome to all of you, you imagination connoisseurs of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's Thursday, and I have to tell you, I am still basking in the afterglow of seeing Star Trek the Motion Picture last night with some old friends, with Inglorious Trekspert, Mr. Darren Doctorman, with Master of Independent Cinema, Chris Gore from Film Threat, and some others. Elizabeth came with me. She'd never seen Star Trek the Motion Picture in the theater. And boy, it was lovely. It was just lovely seeing Star Trek the Motion Picture in the theater again. You know, it's interesting. For all of its Star Trek the Motion Picture has become like Blade Runner to me. I grew up with Blade Runner. I saw Blade Runner the very first show in opening day, 70 millimeter at the Cinerama Theater in Seattle. And for me, I will always hear the opening narration. No matter how many times I watch the new director's cut, all the different versions of Blade Runner, it always opens with, "They don't advertise for killers in a newspaper." You know, it'll always be that way. And with Star Trek the Motion Picture, it's sort of opposite. Once I was able to get the director's, the ABC extended version on VHS, and then, of course, the director's edition in 2001, the DVD, that has become the definitive edition for Star Trek the Motion Picture for me. So even when there are scenes like Spock is crying and the question is posed to him, "For us, Spock," and Spock says, "No, I weep for V'Ger as I would a brother." And all of that stuff, I still see it and hear it. I can't forget it. It's a real damn shame that we don't have a 4K version of the director's edition. Hopefully cooler heads will prevail and we will get one. I mean, why don't we have one? Just spend the money. I mean, I know Paramount has no money. I get it. But it really, for those of you who have never seen Star Trek the Motion Picture or the director's edition, it's just a much better version of the movie. And once again, I felt like an adult watching the film. I really did. I felt, wow, this is an adult movie dealing with adult concerns. And you know, I am convinced, despite the pacing issues and all of that, and you know, I'm acutely aware of them. They're acutely there for all to see on the big screen. The traveling into, I don't mind the going around the Enterprise doesn't never bothered me because it's awesome, and watching Shatner's reaction is in fact awesome. But yeah, I'm a big, sorry, I keep dabbing my brow and I keep trying to get that spot, but it was hot and I was sitting outside with the dogs. So I get it. I understand all the problems, but still the film, what's really interesting about that movie is it's really about three men that are not happy. I mean, if you look at what Star Trek the Motion Picture is really about, you can talk about V'Ger and the evolution of the universe and the ultimate example of an AI and all that. It's all there. It's all true. Very great, heady sci-fi concepts. But really, it's about three men that belong together, that aren't together, that are overcoming their own issues to get back together as a family. And that's one of the things I really do love about Star Trek the Motion Picture. And in that sense, it's different. I mean, there's a little bit of that in Star Trek too, but not as much as there is in Star Trek the Motion Picture. And I really liked seeing it. And it was great. It was great to see it on the big screen. And once again, it just reminds me of Star Trek the Motion Picture is going to be 40 years old this December 7th. And I'm always amazed when you go back. That film is literally 40 years old. You know, it's 2 years younger than Star Wars, which is 42 years old this year. And it's just amazing how this kind of entertainment has been around and it's still vibrant. I mean, can you imagine like living in the 1950s and still watching something that came out in like 1910? I mean, 1910 cinema didn't even really exist. Not like it does. Silent movies were still in the very embryonic stages. They didn't even have a standard frame rate. And then the same amount of time has passed by, like if you lived in the 50s and how much film had changed, cinema, how much entertainment had changed, 2 world wars, the Great Depression, the Roaring 20s. I mean, the amount of time and how time was different then. I don't know. It was just a great experience. I really loved it. And I came home and I've been showing Elizabeth The Boys, and we finished episode 6. Another great show. And that got me thinking. I was like, I turn on my favorite YouTube pundits. This morning, I watched, just for fun, The Critical Drinker, who I like, but his cogent analysis is a lot of the time critical. That's why he's called The Critical Drinker. But he did a great video when he first saw the Top Gun Maverick trailer that just celebrated the idea of here comes Top Gun again, back after 30 plus years, 33 years, actually 34 years, and we're getting it in the theater. And he basically he made a video, a love letter to Top Gun. And I watched that, and I realized, I was like, Ad Astra is opening today. Dark Crystal, Carnival Row, which is something I wanted to see made for 20 years, got made. Big budget science fiction movie starts in theaters today. Ad Astra with a major star in Brad Pitt. People are saying it's Joseph Conrad in space. It's an adult science fiction film. Jonathan Hickman is still killing it with his dueling. Well, they're not even dueling. They're complementary X-Men comics, Power of X and House of X. The 5th issues coming out. Well, one came out, another's coming out. Made me more interested in the X-Men comic books than I have been in, I swear to God, 20 years. I mean, X-Men comics have been telling the same story over and over again for a long time with different variations on a theme. But Hickman, I don't think since Cassandra Nova was introduced in Grant Morrison's X-Men run have I been this excited for X-Men. New X-Men. Joseph Kahn's Bodied hit Blu-ray this week. There's all kinds of stuff that I'm surrounded by that I love, and yet in my YouTube space that I work in here, there's still so much negativity. Last Jedi, blah, blah, blah. Why don't you people like The Last Jedi? I forgot. Oh, Captain Marvel. Didn't like Captain Marvel. The MCU is going to suck. Blah, blah, blah. It's onward. I mean, I'm thinking, where's the love for where we're at now, man? Ad Astra opening in the theater. Hickman's killing it with X-Men. Carnival Row, Boys. There's all kinds of stuff coming out. Good stuff. There's crazy In the Tall Grass, a Joe King and Stephen King, a Joe Hill and Stephen King adaptation. In the Tall Grass, that looks like directed by Vincent Natali, who directed Cube. I mean, come on. That's coming out. In the Shadow of the Moon, some crazy genre movies dropping on Netflix this week. I mean, there's all of this. I mean, maybe it might not all turn out to be great, but there's some great stuff. We're being surrounded by great stuff. There's lots of great genre material everywhere. I just got an email that 1612 slipcase boxed edition of an Eagle Transporter signed by Brian Johnson, who worked on the effects. That's available if I want it. I mean, my God, there's so much good stuff surrounding us, and yet the negativity on YouTube continues. And I find it a little disconcerting. Like, it's one thing to not like something and state your purpose and to talk about it, but you know what? There's all this new stuff coming down the pike. And Rise of Skywalker, boy, I'm sure we're going to see a lot of op-ed pieces about all the love surrounding Star Wars. But look, I get it. I mean, we've had a lot of disappointments. I thought season 8 of Game of Thrones, one of the greatest disappointments of my life. And there's a lot more real cogent analysis of Game of Thrones. Some of it by Critical Drinker that I really appreciated. But we got Dune coming out. Denis Villeneuve's Dune coming down the pike. A lot of excitement happening. I'm very excited about what we're getting in the future. There's a lot of stuff to love. So why not do what the Ewoks do? Yub-nub it up a bit and celebrate the love. I think we shouldn't forget to celebrate the love. So I want to welcome all of you, members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community, you imagination connoisseurs. And you know why you're here? You're here because I'm sponsored by Lucky Tiger Men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And if you go to their website at getluckytiger.com, you can use PGS for Post-Geek Singularity, and you get 20% off your order. One day I'm going to get tagged for someone saying, why do you always say for men who want to look good and feel great? Why not women who want to look good and feel great? It's going to happen one day. Women are always looking good. They've had whole industries cater to them looking good and feeling great for years. How many men's grooming products do you remember that want you to look good and feel great? Lucky Tiger does. So, I was going back. I got a ton of letters. I'll tell you about a funny letter I got. Well, I won't say funny because if they're watching, I don't want them to feel upset. I got a letter that I can't share. Flat out said, nope, you can't read this. I can't let anyone know my ISP. I can't let anybody know about this. But he wrote me a letter, me, a YouTube pundit that's talking about Star Wars, Star Trek, science fiction, but wanted to assure me that yes, indeed, aliens are here. They're here. They're among us. They've been among us for a very long time, but they weren't willing to go any further than that. It was a very serious letter. The offer was made to me that I can contact that person. And my whole thing is, here's the thing. If you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that aliens are here, there are things, and if our governments know that aliens are here, that by definition means whether they're intra or extra or whatever dimensional beings they are, there are technologies that they have. There's things that they know. And I would like to use some insider trading info so I can benefit off this knowledge. So for people who write me and tell me all about aliens being here, that's all well and good. And I'm happy to keep their secret. What I want is information that can benefit me so I can invest money into biotech or the industries I need to invest in so I can get rich. Why can't people tell me these things? I mean, as the Trump administration rolls back environmental protections, which, as you know, I think is probably there's an indication of how much your government cares about not only you, but the planet. If you're living in a world where government is rolling back environmental regulations for business interests, that's bad. And you know that you're being sold out. That alone is an indicator. We in California, they're trying to block our strict car emission standards. They want to roll back California's ability to govern its own emission standards. Come on, man. If there are aliens here, I'd rather know, why don't we use their technology and clean up the atmosphere? Why not get rid of the radiation in Fukushima? So when you write me a letter, me, a YouTube pundit, talking about aliens, am I really the guy you should be contacting to say, hey, aliens are real, I know, but I can't tell you anything more about it? Well, if you can't tell me anything more about it other than they're real, I have to look at you and go, you're kind of a crackpot. Because if you're just going to tell me they're real, you're not helping. I want investment information. I want insider trading information. I want information that's going to benefit me and mine so I can get rich. Please tell me. You know why I want to get rich? Because I want to make good movies. If I had lots of money, I'd make good movies. I'd make more movies. I'd make you guys genre entertainment you can be proud of and love. I promise you, that's what I would do. But I can't do that if I don't have pertinent information about aliens. Don't just dangle a carrot in front of me. Even eventually you dangle a carrot in front of a horse or a donkey and they take your cart up the hill. You give them the carrot at the end. Don't dangle proof that aliens exist in front of me without being willing to back it up. Hook me up. I didn't publish your email address. I want answers. I also want money so I can achieve my dreams and help me out. But a lot of people wrote me about aliens. There's a lot of believers out there. A lot of believers. And I never want to denigrate anyone's beliefs, but you should demand proof of some kind. These people are so sure, and I'm like, where's their proof? Where do they get it from? I would like to be that sure. I want to be as sure that as they are about aliens, about the rise of Skywalker too. I want to be sure. I have no faith in it, but you never know. Anyway, before I delve into these new letters, and I have a lot, I delved into some old letters that I hadn't read. And one of them, my man, Jeffrey Mao, who's written a lot of letters. He's an old-time member of this, as old as you can be after 9 months. A member of the Post-Geek Singularity community. He's written me a number of letters that I have read. And I missed it. How did I miss this letter? It's been on the website. So if you've read this letter on the website, I'm sorry. I had to read it because I loved this letter. And I can't believe, with all of my talk, me being the viceroy of verisimilitude, how could I have not read this letter? But anyway, this is from Mr. Jeffrey M. Jeff M. Hi, Rob. With all the talk recently about verisimilitude, I thought it would be instructive for all of us to kind of set up some ground rules in terms of what we mean by verisimilitude, as well as understanding what it really means when it is broken or enhanced. I don't believe that verisimilitude should be construed as the same as the lack of plot holes, logic gaps, and things like that. We are still suspending our disbelief to an extent, but we are not throwing it out the window entirely. Rather, as you like to point out, we can think of verisimilitude as a realistic enough milieu or environment that has been established by the creators that allows us to suspend our disbelief sufficiently. Well put. For the purposes of this letter, we shall stick with verisimilitude as it relates to plot and story elements, as physical production aspects are far too vast and a whole different discussion. So I will go with a couple of examples and try and illustrate what is decent verisimilitude and how it could be broken. Let's start with Star Wars and hyperdrive hyperspace. We accept hyperdrive as the faster-than-light propulsion technology in the Star Wars galaxy. In the films, it's never explained how hyperdrive works, but apparently from the EU, or now Legends, I guess, hyperdrive was reverse engineered from the Rakatan Empire. This would probably explain why hyperdrive has not seemed to have advanced in the thousands of years of its use by the galaxy. Galactic engineers and scientists can replicate the technology, but are unable to understand how it actually works. Since it works well enough, I suppose no research has been undertaken to learn more about it. The real reason is because, and I'm recalling this from memory, the Rakatans were able to somehow tap into the Force to make hyperdrives work. There's some sense to this, as we have seen in canon many times, Force users being able to communicate, sense, or transmit their powers almost instantaneously over many light years. Therefore, the Force must act as a vast subatomic level where the physical limitations of space-time do not apply. Wait a minute, this sounds like the quantum realm. Therefore, if faster-than-light communication can occur, transportation might also be possible. Having established hyperdrive, we can see where its verisimilitude is enhanced in the canon. We see engines failing. We see that fuel is required. We see that hyperspace exits can be sensed. We see that complex computation is required to plot a safe hyperspace route. We see hyperspace lanes that function much like a highway system, and that certain lanes are taxed or tolled. This all makes sense to us and adds to the verisimilitude. So what can we take away from it? Something like Han's hyperspace exit onto the surface of Starkiller Base? No. Or the controversial hyperspace ramming that Vice Admiral Holdo executes? Yes. Yes, indeed. So for my next example, we'll use our favorite Big Blue Boy Scout, Superman. Superman has decent verisimilitude if we establish a few things first. All of Superman's powers that we have seen consistently throughout different versions are essentially enhancements of existing physical abilities, bar a couple. Flight, which evolved from his super jumping, can be thought of as a way that he can manipulate local gravitational fields. This would also explain how he can lift a large object but not hold it at a balance point. He may be strong enough, but otherwise there's no way he can pick up a train at one end without the other end falling down if he wants to keep it level. The effect must either be localized to close to his body or anything that he touches. Super strength, near invulnerability, freeze breath, super hearing, and telescopic vision are all amplifications of his natural abilities. His X-ray vision can be explained as the ability to perceive the entire electromagnetic spectrum in combination with ultrasonic and infrasonic detection. I don't have any explanation for heat vision, so let's assume our vision of Superman doesn't have it, which is no big loss. Even kryptonite can be explained in that it either blocks his ability to absorb solar radiation or it blocks a pathway in his body that allows him to utilize the energy. We can assume that not only does he absorb solar radiation, but that his body is a battery that stores the energy as he is not constantly exposed to solar radiation. So, not bad in terms of verisimilitude, but how do we know when it is broken? Usually when Superman displays a power that we were not told that he has, or uses a power in a way that doesn't make sense. Superman can fly, but he must still fly like any airborne object would. If he flies too fast, he heats up. He has to bank and curve and change direction. He cannot make an exact 90-degree turn. He cannot throw a cellophane S off his shield, and his kiss cannot erase memories. let's just call a spade and chalk up those as verisimilitude breakers. What is a good enhancement to verisimilitude but wouldn't apply to our Superman as he doesn't have heat vision is Burns' explanation for how Superman shaves. He uses a piece from the hull of his Kryptonian ship that can reflect the heat beam back onto his face, and he is able to focus the intensity of the beam enough to burn the hair off, but not his skin. This enhancement is good because it shows Superman using a power that he has in a creative way that doesn't break the rules. So, if we establish an aspect of a fictional universe well enough, we can have decent to great verisimilitude. This allows us to then see where it is either enhanced or diminished better. Let me know what you think about this, Rob, if you like it or have something to add. Thanks, Jeffrey Mal. Well, Jeffrey Mal, I think, as Tallulah goes by in the background, I think that that's a very succinct, very lovely explanation of verisimilitude and how verisimilitude can work and how it can be broken. And I love this, and it applies to another letter of yours that I'm going to read a little later, but very, very simple. And it's interesting. I mean, I talk about this all the time, and I think a lot of people out there, as much as I talk about verisimilitude, they think I'm a little nuts. Like, what does it matter? Who cares? Like, what do you care if Ray can pilot the Millennium Falcon so well? Well, the thing is, as I said, I want to believe. And if my belief in the fictional, here's the thing. I don't want my belief in the fictional shattered. That's like that. Maybe that's a Burnett axiom. Don't shatter my belief. Let's say what we call it. I don't know. Don't shatter my belief in the fictional. Maybe, I don't know. If you don't respect the rules of fiction, you'll destroy my belief in it. How about that? If you don't respect the rules of fiction, you'll destroy my belief in it. I kind of like that. I might have to refine that, but there you go. And that's what verisimilitude is. Verisimilitude is making me believe in fiction. Ultimately, that's what it is. I want to believe. And the more detail you give, the better off you are. And I think those are great examples, Jeff. Superman and the hyperdrive in Star Wars. And it goes... the question then, to bring it back to Star Trek, is, one of the things about Star Trek the Motion Picture, to bring it on home, is that Star Trek the Motion Picture deals a lot with the warp drive. There are calculations. There is math involved in balancing an antimatter reaction and controlling that reaction to create warp drive. I don't know what any of that means. I don't know what the actual real physics are, but Star Trek the Motion Picture has a big plot point about how the engines are imbalanced. They've never been tested at warp because the Enterprise has been sitting in dry dock, and it had to launch early for Star Trek the Motion Picture, and they make a big deal about it. And that warp drive is the FTL drive in the Star Trek universe. And what was really interesting was how much time was wasted. Basically, what Discovery did, Star Trek Discovery created a magical, and make no mistake, the spore drive was indeed magical. It stripped away all of the verisimilitude that warp drive had given us over the years as a fictional propulsion system and replaced it with magic. And one of the reasons that I hated Star Trek Discovery so much is for that very reason. It wasted time giving us this fictional propulsion system that I couldn't believe in, which made no sense. I think Gilbert's here too. He can't believe in it either. Or he came up to remind me to stop talking about Star Trek Discovery. I don't know. What do you think, Gilbert? I think he thinks when I'm talking, I already gave him cookies before I went on, so I'm not going to give him cookies today. He's had cookies. He's had a gummy bear. He even had a slice. You want to see dogs? Cheddar cheese. Cheddar cheese is crack for this dog. And he knows that I'm a sucker and will give him cheddar cheese, even though it's like gourmet cheddar cheese that probably costs more than I want to know. Right, Gilbert? That's right, buddy. Anyway, so, hey, I like that. So thanks for that letter, Jeff. I very much appreciated it. So again, as the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, if I can always talk about JB Bonifacio says, let's get Raylo. For those of you who haven't seen it, I posted on the Facebook page. The Oral Knots dropped they're the best. They dropped a new dance track called Raylo. And you got to see it. It's sung by Kylo Ren, and it's the dance jam of the fall. I'm telling you, it's great. Let's get Raylo. You can see it on the Post-Geek Singularity group on Facebook. I posted it up there, so check that out. So this we got some good stuff here, and I'm going to read it. There's one thing that somebody asked, and this is an important subject, and I don't address it nearly enough. And I'm going to find it. And let's see. I've got to find it where it is here. Where did it go? Hang on, I'm going to find it. And I know you guys, you're just going to love this because it's important. Well, you know what? I can't find it. It's passing by me, so I'm going to read a letter from Mark C. Mark Chure, because I love it when people write letters in that are about something I've covered, and this is a good one. This is from Mark C. Greetings, Robert. I hope your comic book friend Jacob Fudge hears this letter, and I hope it's cathartic. For those of you who don't know, Jacob Fudge, who has a comic book store, he recently opened a comic book store, and we had some of his friends. We had accounts of how some of his friends helped him open his new comic book store. I hope it's doing well. But he also wrote in about the horror he experienced going to the movies with the public. Someone once said, hell is other people, and never more so than movie audiences in the age of social media. So this is from Mark C. I hope your comic book friend Jacob Fudge hears this letter. I hope it's cathartic. Back in the 90s, I was taking my date to see a film which involved an asshole with a laser pointer. Unbeknownst to this asshole, Jefferson Parish Sheriff Henry Lee was in the crowd. 10 minutes into the film, Sheriff Lee, a large Samoan, I should say, bound down the steps, grabbed said a-hole by the ear, and escorted him out. As we left the theater, the manager took my name, address, and how many tickets I bought. 8 months later, I received a copy of a letter from the annoying audience member. The letter was a court-mandated apology explaining that he was ticketed for disturbing the peace, and to avoid 18 months in jail, he needed to write everyone an apology. Along with the letter was a check for $24. The letter explained that he was also fined, and the ticket price of every audience member, $12 a seat. It was a full house in a 550-seat auditorium. That is not an insubstantial amount of money. Can you imagine 550 times 12? It's pretty great. Good for them. That's justice, he says. Then there was the Bruce Willis movie Hostage. In the row in front of me was a woman who spent the first 20 minutes of the film on her phone. I couldn't stand it any longer, and I told her to get off her effing phone. After the movie finished, she turned and looked at me and said this: for your information, that's none of your business, but my mother has Alzheimer's and I have my phone on 24/7. This was my retort. Then wait for the DVD. Or better yet, don't bother answering the phone. She won't remember the call anyway. She had some choice words for me. I wish theaters would put ushers at the top of screenings for the first 30 minutes of each showing. If a person is seen on their phone, just have them removed without warning. After watching a few get tossed, more people will get the hint. So that's it. I just wanted to share. If I go on, I will get into why the original Star Trek trio is a representation of how a two-party system should work. Spock being the conservative and McCoy being the liberal and Kirk being the president that gets both sides of an idea and decides which is the best course of action. But I digress. That's, of course, if the two-party system, if the Republicans understand that they're supposed to work with the Democrats and work with the president as well. That's a great letter. I'm glad to hear that movie justice was served. Here's what I don't understand. What I don't get is when you go into a movie theater, I've always thought, I grew up thinking this, that there is an unspoken covenant with everybody that goes in the movie theater. You are paying money to go have an experience, a collective communal experience together. That's what a movie theater is for. And we live in a world where people suddenly think that it's because of social media mostly that they can disrupt this that suddenly they themselves, whenever somebody answers a phone or texts or tweets during a film, what they have done is they've broken a social contract, an unspoken one, and of course it's not written down anywhere, but they have put themselves in front of everybody else in the collective communal experience that you all have paid for. And I've always believed, and I really loved this punishment, because once you answer your phone or you text or a phone lights up in a darkened room where there's supposed to be no other light other than the light of a projector or exit signs, what you're doing is you then have put yourself outside and you've made yourself more important than everybody else in a movie theater. And I think that first of all, that proves you are an a-hole. It's also, and I know people say, well, there's other horrible things going on in the world. Yes, but you know why there are lots of horrible things going on in the world? For every top of Mount Everest of horrible things, there's 100 million other horrible things that are at the bottom of that mountain that collectively contribute to the major horrors of our life. Civilization is not just about the big things. It's also about the small things. It's about manners. It's about holding a door open for somebody, man or woman. It's also about the fact that if somebody does hold the door open for you, you don't throw that in their face. And I think that people in movie theaters and the people that are talking in classical music concerts, I have no problem when I turned around and used foul language and was very angry. I don't have any problem doing that, because those people, if that's what they're doing at a concert, if that's what they're doing in a movie theater, whatever else they're doing in their lives is somehow, in some way, shape, or form, ultimately going to cause a problem for me later on. And it's going to cause a problem for you too. People that don't parent their children in public spaces, I understand parenting kids is tough. But parents that bring, say, young children to an opening night a screening of a big movie like Avengers and Infinity War or Endgame, why is your experience and the ease of bringing your kids so you don't have to pay for a babysitter, why is that something that the rest of the world should have to deal with? I see it all the time, and I ask myself, what are these people going to do to me somehow elsewhere? They've already people's personal the way they behave is affecting me now, even though it's only in a movie theater or at a concert. But what is going to happen 5 years or 10 years or 20 years down the line if I cross paths with these people again, or people of their ilk? That's what civilization is. It's to be civilized. It's to live by a set of rules. And what if everybody just stopped stopping at stop signs one day? I mean, there's not enough police to enforce that. One day we just decided, we don't have to pay attention to stoplights. I mean, it's the same kind of thing, and it's weird how we pick and choose what part of the social sphere we are going to adhere to when it's more convenient or less convenient for us. But what does that say about everybody else? It kind of makes me sad. Now, here's a letter I wasn't going to read. I was not going to read this letter. I don't know if I should, but I'm going to read it anyway. I'm going to read it anyway just because I can. Tommy Martinson, before I read that letter, Tommy Martinson says, I know you and John talked briefly about the Age of Resistance, but love to hear you really go deep into and review it. Separate video, maybe. I think you're speaking about the Disney sequel trilogy, which would be the Age of Resistance, the Star Wars Age of Resistance. I don't know if I want to do that. There's been so much ink spilled on the Age of Resistance. I honestly think that the Star Wars sequel trilogy, from its conception, isn't worth actually looking at, because it's not, first of all, it's not cohesive. It's not one person's idea of what the story should be. It's truly a mishmash, and we'll see if they have been able to retcon an ending onto this storyline. I'd want to wait to see with the Skywalker saga, because that's what they're calling it, the Age of Rebellion. the age of republic, the age of rebellion, and the age of resistance, which I think is kind of weird. I think that it should have been, I understand that it sounds good, but whoever thought of that, it should have been the age of republic, the age of empire, and then the age of resistance or whatever. But okay. And that goes to the modern thinking. I just think that there's not as much thought put into things these days. So, but I should go into it. I should go into it. But, again, I want to stay positive. There's so many good things. Like as far as I'm concerned about Star Wars, I haven't been more excited about Star Wars. The last time I was this excited about Star Wars for something Star Wars was before Phantom Menace opened, and that's how excited I am about The Mandalorian, because I feel that the people involved with The Mandalorian really understand Star Wars. I feel like we're getting people that were given a carte blanche to create what they wanted. And I think that's great. I think we're going to get something amazing out of it. So I'm very excited. I'm very excited about The Mandalorian. Rise of Skywalker, I'm going to take a wait and see approach. I never thought there would be a time when I will go see Rise of Skywalker. Of course, I go see any science fiction, fantasy, or horror film. I try to anything that remotely interests me. And Star Wars has interested me for the better part of 40 years. So why wouldn't I go see it? The problem is I'm not excited for it. For the first time in my life, I'm not even paying attention when tickets go on sale. I'm like, I got to go see it the opening night at the Dome with all my buddies and see everybody and feel that excitement. And I just don't care. I mean, for me to not care, for me to not feel, I'm much more excited about, say, something like Bond 25. And I hear that, of course, the trailer is supposed to drop next week. It's rumored to drop on the 25th of September. I've heard. Maybe that's not true, but I'm much more excited about James Bond. And the last James Bond movie was bad. I get excited for every James Bond movies. My excitement for James Bond movies, even when the last Bond film was not so good, has not abated. I mean, I was climbing up the walls to see GoldenEye. It'd been 6 years since a Bond film would come out, and I really didn't like License to Kill. But with Rise of Skywalker, I already know that there's nothing in it that I'm particularly interested in from a story standpoint. So I've got nothing to look forward to. I don't know, like, other than Palpatine's going to be in the movie. To me, I'm like, that seems like, well, that doesn't seem very well conceived. And seeing Billy D. Williams fly the Falcon, that interests me. But there's no story reason why it's happening. So he hasn't been set up in the other two movies. So to me, I'm like, okay, it'd be nice to see Billy D. Williams, but I'm not excited about it. Like, I'm not excited about Rise. I'm much more excited to see Ad Astra. And that's pretty crazy, which is weird. I never thought that would be the case. But it's not that I think that I don't think Rise of Skywalker is going to suck. I don't go into it going it's going to suck. But what it is going into, I'm going into that movie with no interest in it at all from a story standpoint. There's no narrative thread that I see coming down like, okay, you're telling me Palpatine's in the movie. I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense. So why is he in the movie? And I'm actually fighting against elements that we know are a part of Rise of Skywalker. I mean, you've got Star Wars, so okay, I want to see a good Star Wars movie. But there's nothing in it that I'm looking forward to. And here I'm not being a hater. But, there's lots of books that come out every week and lots of albums that come out every week. And I'm not that interested in them unless there's something about them that I am interested in particular. Stephen King's new book. I'll read anything Stephen King writes, and he's written a lot of crap, but I've read it all. Tommy Knockers was terrible. Read it, and but Rise of Skywalker, I'll go see it, but I'm not excited about it. There's no reason for me. There's no intellectual reason for me to be wondering what's going to happen with that narrative, because I have no idea. That narrative is going to have to be reestablished by the film itself and then carried through to a conclusion, and that somehow is also going to be a satisfying conclusion to the previous two stories that really weren't that interesting in the first place. But anyway, it'll be interesting to see. I don't know. Willow Yang says, any predictions for Storm Area 51 tomorrow? How many people do you think will actually show up? Will we finally see them aliens? Well, Willow, I'll tell you something. Part of me, I would love to see millions of people show up. Millions of people ready to storm Area 51 and actually do it. I want to live in a world where that happens. I also want to live in a world where the Weekly World News' Bat Boy was real. But I want to believe aliens are here. honestly. When somebody writes to me and tells me definitively they're here, I'm like, great. Well, why can't I meet one then? I'm saying right now on this show, if there's aliens here watching me right now, I promise I won't tell anybody. If you want to probe my anus, you can do that. I really would love to just hang out with you guys for a couple of minutes, maybe ask a few questions, show me some of your technology. But really, I'd have a few questions about general questions about your society. What brought you to Earth? How did you get past the kind of times that we're in right now? How did you not destroy your planet? You know, why are you keeping yourselves a secret when clearly we could be needing your help? And maybe they have a good explanation. So I'd like to see, I'd like to believe we live in a world where millions of people would show up, storm Area 51, and find out these answers. Not like the Air Force hasn't had plenty of time to move alien bodies and alien crafts if they needed to do so. But so I think a storm Area 51 is going to be about as cataclysmic as Y2K was. I don't think very many people are going to show up. I think it's going to be a big bust. I don't think anyone's going to storm Area 51 because unfortunately we just don't have that kind of wherewithal. I wish we did. You know, you get more wherewithal with ranchers defending their lands from the U.S. government than I think we're going to get for storm Area 51. Because really, I mean, if you really think about it, why would there be anything still at Area 51 if, say, a Roswell crash happened in the 40s? Why would you leave it there? Why wouldn't you move it? Move it somewhere else. I would. Oh, oh. Tommy Markinson comes back at me and says, "Oh, I meant Dark Crystal Age of Martinson." Markinson. I'm thinking Markinson from A Few Good Men. Tommy Martinson says, "I meant a Dark Crystal Age of Resistance." He wants me to talk about it more. Well, first of all, here's what I think about Dark Crystal Age of Resistance. It was an unbelievably well-written, well-conceived, very complex story that completely fleshed out a planet, a whole race of beings, well, couple races, both the Skeksis and the Gelfling tribes. I really appreciated. I thought it was it was in the finest traditions of the best fantasy storytelling we've ever seen on the television or streaming medium. And to be honest, I was never a huge fan of Dark Crystal. I appreciated it. I could look at it, and I appreciated the artistry that went into it, but I thought it was very flat. And it was very hard for me to get involved in it. I watched it, was like, okay, but it was never one of my favorite movies. I thought Age of Resistance did a monumentally better job of telling a story set in that world, and I truly loved it. And I thought Louis Leterrier did an amazing job directing it. The writing staff was delivering top-notch, incredible writing, and the show just got better. You know, the first episode's a little slow, but as it rolls along, it gets much better. And I think it's an astonishing achievement in fantasy television. I mean, between that and Carnival Row, even though Carnival Row I thought was, you know, a bit hit and miss, and I think it could have been more focused, but I really liked it. And remember, Carnival Row was adapted from was a screenplay, A Killing on Carnival Row, and they expanded a lot of the ideas. And I think, you know, for the most part, I think Carnival Row was definitely, I thought I'll give it a B+. Love the world. I love the design. It's one of the most beautiful television shows I think it's ever been done. The world that it's created, this sort of steampunk London-esque type of a world. I liked all the acting. I mean, Jared Harris killing it. Most valuable player, Jared Harris. I mean, Carnival Row, Chernobyl, unbelievable. That guy, what a year he's got. He's always classing up that joint, that Jared Harris. And I just, yeah, pretty great. Alan Sachs is here. Alan Sachs says, seeing the motion picture on Sunday was completely different. People were cheering when Spock and McCoy came. People were laughing at McCoy's jokes. It was exciting. You know, people forget that Star Trek The Motion Picture is pretty damn amusing. You know, and one of the things now, when you look back now on Star Trek The Motion Picture, and look, I think time, the passage of time and its effect on how art is perceived by the current age is just as important as anything else about art. Because great art endures. It transcends time. And one of the things that people forget when you go back and you watch Star Trek The Motion Picture now, which was a huge part of it for me as a 12-year-old seeing it in the theater for the first time, is that there had been no Star Trek for a decade. No one ever thought there was ever going to be any more Star Trek. And the idea that these actors the same actors that were in a TV show for 3 years had come back to be in what was at the time the most expensive movie ever made, not necessarily because of the production. Basically, Star Trek: The Motion Picture is pretty much a bottle episode. It's all shot on sets in the studio. There's a few on location shots, but not many. And the idea that we'd never seen these characters, so seeing them back in this new milieu that we'd never seen them in, the new starship, we saw Earth of the 23rd century. For me as a Star Trek fan, there was so much amazing about Star Trek: The Motion Picture. When I first saw it, I was like, oh my God. So I was hanging on every single thing that you saw. You'd go from a close-up shot to a wide shot, like when Admiral Kirk is first revealed, and you're seeing these shuttlecrafts that you'd never seen. You're seeing Starfleet headquarters. It was incredible. Well, none of that is when you go back and you watch it, all of that is forgotten. So there was an element, if I was a fanatical Star Trek fan like I was, of discovery in every frame of that movie, everywhere you go. Now, I've seen that movie a million times, and something struck me about the film that I have not been able to get an answer for. And if any of you know the definitive answer, if you can find out this question for me. So in Star Trek: The Motion Picture, when Spock goes EVA to go into V'ger and mind meld with the representation of the Ilea probe, he has a jetpack that is counting down. The jetpack has a woman's voice, I guess the computer voice. It's not Majel Barrett, Roddenberry. It's not Majel Barrett. I think that I have no proof of this. I've never read this anywhere. It's the same woman, the exact same voice that is narrating the beginning of John Carpenter's Escape from New York. And famously, the woman that is the narrator at the beginning of John Carpenter's 1981 Escape from New York is, say it with me now, Jamie Lee Curtis. I am convinced that Jamie Lee Curtis is the voice of Spock's jetpack in Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I've never heard that before, but last night when I was sitting in the theater, I don't know why this never struck me. It is the same voice. It is absolutely the same voice. And I think it's Jamie Lee Curtis. Can't prove it, don't know it. And there's a possibility that if it is Jamie Lee Curtis, when she was laying this down, she didn't even know what it was for. But I would love to know if that is indeed Jamie Lee Curtis's voice in Star Trek: The Motion Picture. See, every time you see something, I hadn't seen the last time I saw, let me drop a name. The last time I saw Star Trek: The Motion Picture in a theater was 20 years ago, 1999. I saw it at the Directors Guild of America with Robert Wise. I said that yesterday, with Robert Wise, the director of the film, also the editor of Citizen Kane, the director of West Side Story and the Andromeda Strain, The Day the Earth Stood Still. That's right. And there's a picture I like to recycle in my Facebook every year when that screening happened, of all of us standing there with Robert Wise in the lobby of the Directors Guild of America. There you go. So, yes. So, Alan Sachs, it was completely different. It was completely different. Emil Johansson is here. He says, do you think aliens have politics? Well, I think by definition, if there's an alien flying machine that is built, if there is a machine that they are traveling in, if they're not extra-dimensional beings, I can guarantee you there is politics of some kind, because there is always politics. Whenever you're working on a project, whenever you're trying to build something, there is politics. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite episodes of television ever is actually about the construction of a spacecraft. And that is episode 5, Spider, of From the Earth to the Moon, is all about Grauman building the LEM, the Lunar Excursion Module for the Apollo program. The whole episode is about the politics of building that LEM and how people dealt with one another. So whether it's democratic or fascistic or socialistic or communistic, whatever, I am sure that any advanced society that has the technology to build machines that would bring them to Earth absolutely have politics of some kind. There always is politics. Whenever you're working on a project with a bunch of people, you got to play a political game. You've got to be a political animal. In fact, being a political animal is part of being a human being. I mean, I learned how to manipulate my dad when I was young. I think that was pretty political. I used to do the same thing every time. When I was a kid, I didn't have an allowance. Like when I was 10 years old, I mean, maybe I got an allowance, a couple bucks a week, but it wasn't enough to actually buy something. So, like, for instance, I would say that, and this didn't work all the time, but if the Kenner Millennium Falcon was going to come out, or it did come out at World of Toys, because we didn't have Toys R Us, I would call up. I mean, all the guys at the toy store knew me because I was always calling World of Toys about whether model kits had come out and what was up, and they knew me. And if something came out that I just had to have, and it wasn't my birthday and it wasn't the holidays or anything, I'd go. This is what I would do. This is how I'd manipulate my dad. I'd walk in, I'd go, and he would fall for this every time, even though he knew. He knew. And I knew that he knew, and he knew that I knew that he knew. So I'd walk in, I'd be like, "Hey, Dad, never mind." And I would turn around, walk away. He'd go, "No, what?" I was like, "Well, no, I can't ask." And I'd start to walk. "Come on, what is it?" And I'd do it like 3 times. But the 4th time, I'd always be like, "Well, World of Toys got in the Kenner Star Wars Millennium Falcon. I was wondering maybe you could take me this weekend and buy it for me." I mean, as I said, it was only a few times I did this, and it was for things that, like, I couldn't live without, but that was the biggest one. And I remember what's really interesting about that. You know what else happened that day? Not only did I rope my dad into buying me the Kenner Millennium Falcon for the Star Wars action figures, it was also the day that Phantasm had opened. It opened. Phantasm opened on Friday. It was the Saturday, the day after Phantasm had opened. And of course, 79, so I was even 12, probably. I think it was 12. I want to say it was summer, so it was maybe 12. So, I was, even at 12, I was manipulating my dad, and I made him take me to see Phantasm. And he came in and he watched it with me for the first 5 minutes. And when Tommy gets stabbed in the graveyard by the lady in lavender, my dad was out. He went and smoked a cigar in the lobby or outside until I was done watching Phantasm. My dad was a great guy, and he was responsible for a lot of my fandom. Now I'm coming to a letter that I don't know if I should read, but this one comes from Martin Lawrence, and you'll see why I'm stepping into another minefield here. Greetings and salutations, Rob. I wanted to get some understanding on fan films on YouTube and copyright issues. Are you able to just knock one of these up and upload it? Surely there must be some legal issues with using studio IPs, intellectual properties. On the other side of the coin, there are 2 tremendous films out there that people should seek out. Sandy Kalura's Batman Dead End is amazing. Although it's quite an old one, the practical costumes, effects, and setting is top quality. The other is the Friday the 13th fan film Never Hike Alone. It's the best Friday the 13th movie in years. It runs for about 55 minutes and has a cheeky cameo at the end. Anyway, would love to get your thoughts on this. Yours sincerely, Martin L. Well, Martin, at first, I would just like to say I don't know anything at all about fan films. No, that isn't true. But in actuality, would it surprise you to know that I have a special thanks on Batman Dead End? At one point, I was going to edit Batman Dead End, but I was just too busy with DVD work, and I had an edit bay at a place called Midtown Edit, and I couldn't do it. But I did get a special thanks because I did consult on the making of Batman Dead End. Of course, that is a famous Batman movie where Batman is going after the Joker, and in the midst of that, he runs into a predator and an alien, as one does. And Clark Bartram plays Batman. He looks great in the part. It's a great depiction of the Batman. Now, here's the thing. Yes, it's the question that you're asking. If you're working with someone else's IP, yeah, they can come after you. But as long as you make no money and it's not commercial at all, then most people leave you alone for the most part. As many people know, I was involved in the Axanar project, beginning with Prelude to Axanar and the Axanar feature film that famously made $1.5 million ultimately off crowdfunding, and then it was sued. The project was sued by rights holders, IP holders, CBS, and Paramount, and there was a great lawsuit. And well, it wasn't great, but it was a big lawsuit. It was very high profile. And once again, I'll state for the record, I was asked to get involved in that project. And I got involved in that project, and I edited Prelude to Axanar. And if you want to see, I think one of the best fan films that's ever been made, to be honest, is Prelude to Axanar. I was just the editor, although I had a lot of creative leeway and a lot of input. For instance, when I was editing that movie, there was no narrator in the film, and I suggested perhaps we needed one. And certainly, the finished film represents a much different. It is the script, but I had some substantial input in terms of structuring the film, so that was a lot of fun. And again, Prelude to Axanar, and it was always going to be proof of concept for a feature film that we were going to make. Now, I was not supposed to direct it originally, and then I went in, and if you look into Axanar Vulcan scene, the Axanar Vulcan scene is something I took. It was a concept that original director Christian Gossett was running with, and then I sort of took it over. He left the project. It was basically I had to audition to direct the Axanar feature film. So I did the Vulcan scene, the Vulcan scene. Watch it if you haven't seen it. We shot that in a parking lot one Saturday. Shot it in a parking lot over the course of a day because we used sunlight as the light source because I wanted it to look natural and those virtual environments. And it was fun. It was a lot of fun. I won't get into all that, but yes, ultimately, I think you're asking more about the reasons. Anybody who's a rights holder of anything, if you're going to utilize whatever it is they're rights holders of, they can shut you down. Even if you're not monetizing something, they can send you a cease and desist. It's theirs. It's not yours. Period. There are no ifs, ands, or buts. Now, I think what a lot of rights holders have come to understand, is the very fans that are making these fan films are the very fans that are also their most passionate fans of the properties and what they're doing. I mean, I look at fan films as advertising for the IP. And as long as the people aren't profiteering off it or making money off of it, I think fan films are actually a good thing, because anything that elicits that kind of passion where you're going to go in and there was a lot of passion and there was a lot of expertise used to make Batman Dead End. I mean, that alien costume, the Predator costume, the Batman costume, the Joker makeup, all of that was conceived and executed by Sandy Kalura and his team. And they did a phenomenal job. And that kind of passion, that kind of creativity is nice to see, and I think, look, there's so many budding writers that began their writing careers writing licensed fiction, whether it was Star Trek or Buffy or X-Files, you never know. But there's a lot of writers who got their start that way. One of my favorite Star Trek writers is David Mack, and he went on and he has his Dark Arts series, sort of an alt history, dark fantasy series that's amazing. The last one being the Iron Codex. And he began his writing career. I mean, he also submitted material to Deep Space Nine, but his novels that he wrote, he started out as a fan fiction writer and then graduated to being a real novelist. Where, not that he wasn't a real novelist writing Star Trek novels, but he's created his own IP. And hopefully, we'll see a Dark Arts series on Netflix or on Amazon or on Apple, because I think that would be very cool. So I think one of the great things about fan films is they inspire people to go out and stretch their own creativity. Eventually, I mean, Axanar was supposed to lead, at least in my mind, I wanted to use it as one of the things that people don't understand about my involvement with Star Trek Axanar is I wanted to show people, sure, I want to make a Star Trek movie. That was a dream, first and foremost. But second of all, I wanted to show people the kind of quality that we could bring to a $2 or $3 million movie, and Axanar would be an example of the kind of epic filmmaking that we could do for not very much money at our budget level. So I was hoping to use the Axanar feature film as a portfolio piece to show people, look at what my team is capable of doing. So we'd like to apply this methodology to our own IP. That was ultimately what I wanted to do, and make a Star Trek movie. And theoretically, I mean, hey, Alec Peters, who created the Axanar project, says he's going to start shooting his 2 15-minute shorts in a mere few weeks. So good luck to him. So who knows? But yeah, I've never seen Never Hike Alone, a 55-minute Friday the 13th film. I will watch that. And if you say it's that good, heck, I'm in. Count me in. Which I think is great. I really like this letter, this next letter. because it addresses something that is near and dear to my heart, and it should be near and dear to your hearts as well. Just plain Steve, though, says, caught Train to Busan at your recommendation. What a ride. Now sitting down to enjoy Space Cowboys, also a movie you recommended. What a cast. Well, Space Cowboys is not nearly as good as Train to Busan is truly a great entry into the zombie genre. Even if you're tired of zombie movies, Train to Busan, man, that movie was great. A great bit of cinema all the way around. And I can't recommend it highly enough. Space Cowboys, I can't. It's a little dull, to be honest. But I just love seeing those guys act and seeing them go into space. So when I recommend things, there's different. I should give them a little caveat. Maybe in terms of my recommendation scale from 1 to 10, Train to Busan is a 9.5, and I would say Space Cowboys is a 6 if you like space. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'm glad you did. Factual Opinion says, why does everyone think that aliens are enlightened? Well, I'll tell you why. I mean, first of all, as evidenced by our current state of affairs here on Earth, at any time we could find ourselves in a situation where human life is threatened. We saw last month, there was an explosion, a nuclear explosion of some kind. Not the explosion wasn't nuclear, but some kind of nuclear research, whether it was some kind of a nuclear engine, exploded in Russia, irradiating an area where this thing was being researched. We have Fukushima. At any one time, we could do something seriously wrong to our biosphere that would put us in harm's way. And we're doing it every day, whether we're poisoning the groundwater, whether we're spewing particulate matter into the atmosphere. We are not good custodians of. We still are small-minded enough that we put profit motive in front of our own self-interest. We still do that. We are not enlightened enough. I think the idea is that if aliens were here, if they arrived here on Earth, that they had progressed far enough that they hadn't destroyed themselves, which is what a lot of people say when you start studying the Fermi paradox or the Drake equation, or you start, I think it's called, if you want to read, there's a great book that I read it like 10 years ago. Let me see. It's called I think it's called The Great Silence. It's about SETI. Great Silence? And not the Ted Chiang story. And not the IMDb thing. The Great Silence is one of several spaghetti westerns. No. The Great Silence is actually a spaghetti western. That's not what I'm looking for. Let's see. I'll ask for it in books. Maybe I can find it. That's really interesting, though. Let's see. I'm looking in books. Oh, yeah, it is. Okay, here's The Great Silence is The Great Silence. Science. No, this isn't it either. This is something else. This is not the book I read, but now I've just found a book I would read. The Great Silence, Science and Philosophy of Fermi's Paradox. That came out last year. It's $35 in hardcover. Anyway, the book I read was Something Silence. That's all about SETI. The silent exit. Let me just put it. Now I want to know. Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was called The Great Silence. It was a book on SETI. I have it. I have the book. I have to go look it up. But so anyway, I think anybody that thinks that alien beings that could travel the distance of space, that have the technology to the wide gulfs between solar systems or stars, that they would inherently be more enlightened than we are because they were able to at least develop the technology with which to get ships here to Earth without destroying themselves. And I think that's why people think that aliens are enlightened. I mean, that's why maybe if they're not so enlightened, at least they were able to get over their differences where they were able to develop that kind of technology, which is why I think people think, that they think aliens are enlightened. Dan V900 says, out of everything announced for superhero shows and films, I'm hyped most about Crisis. Tom Welling getting confirmed even as Clark is awesome. For those of you who don't know, Tom Welling, who starred in Smallville has been confirmed to be in the upcoming CW crossover Crisis on Infinite Earths. Now, I'm gonna spill the beans. I have a few friends that work on the Berlanti CW shows, and I was told about a year ago that the plans for Crisis on Infinite Earths were enormous, and they were going to try and incorporate things like the Titans. You know, they were going to incorporate all DC shows everywhere if they could into this Crisis on Infinite Earths event. And they seem to have gone a long way toward accomplishing that, putting Brandon Routh, seeing him in the super suit again, bringing Tom Welling into it. I like all that. I think it's amazing. And that's yet another thing to look forward to. How much fun is that going to be? How much fun is it going to be to see Crisis on Infinite Earths in some way, shape, or form on camera again, or for the first time? I mean, it's incredible that we're getting that. And as much as I think my vitriolic hate for Discovery is going to be shifted over to the Watchmen series, even though I'm going to wait and see. I want to love Watchmen because I love Watchmen. I want to love it the way I wanted to love Doomsday Clock, which I don't love Doomsday Clock, but I wanted to love Watchmen. I do want to love Watchmen. And I think this Crisis on Infinite Earths is going to be great. It's going to be so much fun. How awesome is that? Alan Sachs says, what do you think about TNG recycling much from the motion picture? It doesn't bother me at all. I mean, the idea that Riker and Troy are Decker and Ilea, I liked all that. And that Ilea was empathic, and even though she was a Deltan, I had no problem with any of that. They were good ideas. I thought they worked well. The whole idea of the Imzadi, I liked all that. I thought it was great. Using the music again, why not? That Goldsmith theme is so amazing. It didn't bother me because those are the ideas that Roddenberry had. Those were Roddenberry-esque ideas that were recycled, and I enjoyed them. I did. I enjoyed them. This next letter comes from Chris Rigglesworth, and this is a huge. Well, let me just read it. Dear Rob, hoping you and the rest of the Post-Geek Singularity are well. I recently stumbled across the announcement of a movie set to be released on streaming within a few months. It is titled Antrim, the Deadliest Film Ever Made. I honestly can't remember where I heard about it, but when I looked it up, it appears to be from the found footage genre with a documentary-style spin detailing a movie that filmed in the 1970s and wasn't supposed to have any surviving prints. I think I'm intrigued by the similarities it has with John Carpenter's Cigarette Burns from the Masters of Horror anthology, certainly recommended for horror aficionados, or a movie called The Hills Run Red that I might have produced. So I'm looking forward to Antrim's release on streaming, but it also brings me to the reason that I write today. If you remember, I'm the guy who started collecting Laserdiscs about 16 years after its death because I like the nostalgia and I'm having a lot of fun searching out old discs that never received a DVD or Blu-ray release. I avoid purchasing online as much as possible because for me, the thrill is in the hunt. Yes, once you've acquired that long sought-after disc, there's a short-lived sense of satisfaction, but you find that you are soon to be on to the next pursuit. I should send you all my Laserdiscs. It got me wondering how many movies have been lost since the inception of filmmaking. According to some estimates, half of all films made before the 1950s are lost, and 90% of the ones made before 1929 are gone. I find this to be disheartening as these are visual and audible representations of people and places from specific times. Fiction can give us valuable insight into the past. Forgive me, I didn't mean to wax nostalgic. I have two questions for you as a collector of physical media. Are there any movies that you have been searching for to add to your personal collection but have had difficulty finding? And if so, what are they? What, in your estimation, is the hardest movie to track down in general, perhaps one that never actually saw a release or that was lost to time and nearly forgotten? You just beat me to it. Off the top of my head, London After Midnight and The Day the Clown Cried spring to mind. But what is that true unicorn of a film? Thanks for taking my letter, and I hope to have not just a better day, but the best day. Chris W. Well, Chris, first of all, that's a great letter. And I think, unfortunately, the reality of the situation is that, famously a couple years ago, the movie The Alamo was falling into disrepair. Celluloid is not exactly the most stable, believe it or not, but celluloid is the most stable. They actually can make color separation, three strip color separations of movies and store them on celluloid. That's pretty much where they actually take the film and break it down into 3 different separate color strips of the cut negative, and can store those for later use. And they can last, they think, up to 100 years. That they can hold on to a movie for 100 years. But unfortunately, when movies were being made in the beginning of the film business, they didn't really think about storage because it was such a new medium that people didn't think that they necessarily would be watching these movies in 100 years, I think. I don't know. But, I mean, luckily we still have Murnau's Sunrise or Fritz Lang's Metropolis to watch. But, yeah, and the problem is, unfortunately, I hate to say this, there is no money in film preservation of most of the movies. If there's a library of movies that people watch, like, the Bond franchise, Star Wars, big movies, Lawrence of Arabia, movies like that people will watch, well, that's one thing. But most movies, especially older, schlockier movies, they don't have that kind of replay value, because even now, ask yourself, you're collecting old laser discs, but kids today, are they watching Our Gang shorts? Do they even know who Spanky and Alfalfa are? And probably if they do, because they watched those kids' movies, the remakes that were done 20 years ago or whatever. But, I mean, and those are movies worth preserving. But I just think, unfortunately, it's a money issue. It always comes down to a money issue, because it costs money to preserve films. It costs money to store those preserved films. And then it later costs money to put them on mediums, HD, even files or physical media. It costs money to get those out to the public. And the problem is, there's unfortunately no market for it. I mean, eventually these streaming services will put everything on them. And I'm hoping that, one of the great things about having Disney Plus and out there, and having maybe kids will discover, like, Disney live action movies. When I was a kid, I lived for movies like the Herbie movies. I loved Herbie Goes to Monte Carlo and Herbie Goes Bananas and Herbie Rides Again. And I love, like I was tweeting yesterday about Candle Shoe. Candle Shoe is going to be on Disney Plus. That's a Jodie Foster movie. I love, like, Treasure of Matacumbe. You know what? I didn't look to see if Island at the Top of the World was going to be there. Maybe the North Avenue Irregulars isn't. I don't know if that is. But I loved all those movies. And maybe kids today, when you have Disney Plus, kids will be stumbling over these old films that aren't really talked about. The Dexter Riley movies, the Computer Wars Tennis Shoes. Because when you're a kid, you don't know that things are old. And then as you get older, you start thinking, oh, these are old movies. I don't want to watch these. These are out of time for me. But there's no will and there's no money, because someone's got to pay for that film preservation, and it's expensive. And if it's not done well, I even heard, like, look, The Black Hole just came out this past month on the Disney Movie Club. It's been recalled because they screwed up, and they don't have the overture apparently is on the disc, but you can't get to it because they didn't add a menu item for it. I mean, think about that. So the disc is getting recalled. The Black Hole, which was one of the last movies, interestingly enough, one of the last 2 movies that had overtures. They weren't the very last ones, but The Black Hole and Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which were released in December of 1979 within 2 weeks of each other, each had great overtures. That's just an aside. But yeah, I mean, there's no money and there's no will, because most people are disinterested in a lot of these movies. Even The Alamo, which is a big movie, the head of MGM at the time didn't want to spend the money to preserve The Alamo. I mean, it's crazy. And it's just amazing to me. But again, you have to find out who's going to pay for that and how are they going to monetize it. Unfortunately, you can't, studios aren't in the, they're not exactly, I mean, I think that all of our history should be preserved, all of it. But I understand dealing with movies and how many people are ever going to watch them. I mean, heck, I can't even get people to watch black and white movies. And half of our film legacy is black and white. And I don't know, it's a bummer. But to your other question about what are some physical media, let me tell you, there's a couple. One of them was the 5-hour version of Until the End of the World, Wim Wenders' Until the End of the World. I wanted desperately to get that on physical media. Criterion announced it this week, as I've been talking about. And I have been dying to see it. I didn't love it, but I like Until the End of the World a great deal. I had the Japanese Laserdisc when it first came out. So I am very excited that we are going to get Until the End of the World, the 5-hour version. I can't wait. Now, there's a movie that I've always wanted to see, and it's called it's called On the Silver Globe. Now, I've never seen it, and it's directed by Andrzej Zulewski. I can't Polish names. Andrzej Zulewski. I've always said Zulewski. That's probably a bastardization of his name, but he directed Possession, the 1981 horror film Possession with Isabelle Adjani and Sam Neill. I have wanted to see his movie On a Silver Globe forever. And I've seen clips of it, but I've never seen it. It apparently came out in Poland on February 10th, 1989. I've never seen it. On the IMDb, it says, a team of astronauts land on an inhabitable planet and form a society. Many years later, a single astronaut is sent to the planet and becomes a messiah. I've wanted to see that movie my whole life. I've never seen it. I'm dying to see it. To me, that's kind of one of my holy grails, my unicorn, as it were. I'd love to see it. I know people have seen it. I mean, I haven't looked for it that hard, but that's one of those movies. London After Midnight. Most of the movies that I've wanted have come out. The thing that I most want now is I want Second Sight's copy of Dawn of the Dead mastered from the original negative. That's what I want the most in terms of physical media. But in terms of tracking down, I did all my movie tracking down in the 80s on VHS. And what was so amazing is things I used to dream of, like, wow, I'd love to get an uncut copy of Lucio Fulci's The Beyond instead of the American bastardization Seven Doors of Death. Well, getting The Beyond is like old hat. People forget getting Dario Argento movies. Like, wow, wouldn't it be great if you could get Suspiria uncut? So in my life, I've had an embarrassment of riches. And now there's very few things left. I mean, On a Silver Globe is one of those things. And there's not a lot that I don't have, which is great, of the movies that I've wanted to see or that I haven't been able to obtain. So there isn't a lot, and even Metropolis, I've got the Giorgio Moroder version from the 80s, and now I've got different versions. They keep finding footage from Metropolis and adding to it. I mean, it's amazing. We live in amazing times. I wanted to see the original version of Exorcist 3, even though we only got to see it on VHS. That came out. Shout Factory put that out. I'd love to see the director's cut of Star Trek: The Motion Picture put out. The director's edition, pardon me. It's not a cut. It's a director's edition. I'd love to see that in 4K restored. But to be honest with you, the thing that I most want to do right now is I would like to take my own film. I would like to raise the money. I would like to buy the negative. And I'd like to do a new cut and a new restoration of Free Enterprise in 4K. Because if that's the only movie I've ever made, at least I can future-proof it for the next couple of decades. That's what I'd like to do. I know that's a little self-serving, but true. I mean, it's funny. Free Enterprise was one of the very last laser discs ever made. Why shouldn't it be the last 4K disc ever made? So, yeah, but I'd love to see Day the Cloud Cried too. I absolutely would. I think that would be a good thing if I could do that. Okay, now this letter asks important questions, and I found an article. I actually did some research to answer this question. So I am gonna read this letter, but hang on, let me just see. Magic K says Jason Isaacs is going to voice Superman in Red Sun. Well, that's cool. I'll watch that. I love Red Sun. I thought that was a great Elseworld story. For those of you who don't know, Red Sun is a story about Superman landing in Russia instead of in Kansas. So check that out. Tommy Martinson is here again. He says, I think Cowboys and Aliens is highly underrated. Liked that it treated itself as a serious, authentic Western with aliens. I like my serious sci-fi. Tommy, I will agree with you. I think Cowboys and Aliens is definitely a fun time at the movies, kind of like the Zathura is. I don't think it's the greatest thing in the world, and I got definitely some issues with it, but I thought it was fun. I enjoyed it. It's Cowboys and Aliens. What's wrong with that? Brandon Valenzuela says, I want to know the location of all the cut footage from Showgirls. You know what movie you just brought? Okay, here's another one then. You just reminded me of something else, Brandon. I want to see all of the X-rated footage from Event Horizon. Apparently, when they were shooting the hell scenes, they went above and beyond with porn stars, etc. I would love to see that. I'd love to see the unexpurgated, the restored version. They were going to do that, but apparently, I guess they don't have the negative anymore. But I would love to see Event Horizon. But, I don't know if I want to see the cut footage from Showgirls. I mean, what we saw was pretty. I love Showgirls, by the way. I'll admit it. I love Showgirls. Definitely love Showgirls. It's Paul Verhoeven. I love all of Paul Verhoeven. But Showgirls is definitely, hey, it's a crazy movie. But yeah. So, I there you go. Look, Showgirls. That's very funny. Maybe we'll see that. So this letter comes from R.J. Walters. And this is an important letter. This might be the most important letter I've read on the show ever. No, I'm kidding, but it's an important letter. R.J. Walters. Hello, the great Rob. I don't know if I'm the great Rob, but I am the I am the viceroy of verisimilitude and the master of fun and wonder. So there you go. Love your show. And since I know you're a statue collector, e.g. Gentle Giant, I am in dire need of your help. I recently bought 2 statues from 2 different comic book stores. Both were Wolverine figures. One was in the 80s costume, number 268 out of 1,000. Underneath says Gentle Giant. But the other is a Wolverine 74 Tiger Yellow Suit version that says Diamond Select, number 182 out of 1,000, made in China. Is my Wolverine 74 Yellow Tiger Suit statue a fake? I ask because I saw the same yellow tiger suit Wolverine statue in another comic retailer store, but that paint seemed better and had the same underbase stating Gentle Giant, like my brown and gold Wolverine. I can surely show these in my pictures if you need them. Well, that's interesting. Well, first of all, remember that Gentle Giant is a manufacturer and Diamond Select is Diamond Select. I mean, it's Diamond Distribution. It's their retail arm. And they could have actually taken Gentle Giant's original statues, repackaged them, or had them repainted or something. So they might have done another run or had Gentle Giant do another run for them. So I think both are probably legit because both Gentle Giant and Diamond Select are legitimate companies. And it's not unusual for having Gentle Giant would manufacture things. They later got into the business themselves, but they would manufacture things for other people. And maybe they did do that very thing. Now, it got me thinking. I was reading the other day about bootleg, like Hot Toys figures. And I've never come across that because, I order from Sideshow or whatever. And I've never really... sometimes I'll go to Frankensons if I want something. I know they have it, or I will buy off eBay. But for the most part, I've never come across fake Hot Toys figures, but I've read a lot about people who had. So I actually looked up. I did some research. I Google searched, how do you look up bootleg action figures? Now, first of all, there are bootleg action figures in the sense that, like, there are action figures that are unlicensed. They're unlicensed action figures. Like I mentioned, the Stallone Justice Judge, this 6-scale Sylvester Stallone figure from Judge Dredd, the original Judge Dredd from the 80s or the 90s. And that's a bootleg figure, but it's made by a company. I mean, so it's a bootleg figure in general. I have a lot of bootleg figures. I have a lot of what are called third market or not third market, but third party manufacturers. That there's a lot of unlicensed figures that people are never going to make. And so I buy a lot of that stuff. And not as much as I used to because I don't have any money to buy lots of action figures, being the independent filmmaker. But there's a lot of action figure fakes out there, especially coming out of China, because it's lucrative. I mean, when you've got cheap manufacturing and you can get a lot of money for premium grade figures from like Hot Toys, it's no wonder. There's some videos about finding Hot Toys fakes in China stores in Hong Kong and things like that, which are great. But here was an article I found. It was from 2015. Bootleg. It's on the From Japan blog, Japanese auction and shopping proxy service. the From Japan blog. That's at fromjapan.co.jp. They have this article from October 9th. Bootleg figures found out how to avoid fake figures. This is their advice. Know the character really well. Find out where it was manufactured. That you got to look for paint jobs that aren't as good, like you said with your statue. That the box art can have weak or faded fonts, no barcodes, inaccurate coloring of the logos, awkward wording or wording that makes no sense because of language barriers, fonts that overlap or merges with the rest of the box art design and looks like a misprint, no trademark. They're missing official manufacturer's seals or stickers. The sculpt material, that bootleg figures are often made of cheaper, flimsier plastic or other bad materials. The props that come with the figures are bent or misshapen, things like that. There's missing parts. This was a good one. General ridiculousness. If the product placement just seems off or you've never heard of the product before, steer clear until further research can be accomplished. A blue, black, and red colored Batman riding on a white pony probably isn't an official product. Bootleg figures are often sold in lots, like when it comes to trading or petite figures. The price, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. Then I like this one. Aroma versus stench. Official figures, when opened, will greet your nostrils with a fresh but pungent plastic smell. Anyone who collects action figures knows that smell, and it is wonderful. Bootleg figures downright reek, and that scent will linger unpleasantly. That difference between a nice aroma on one hand and an unbearable stench on the other will be very noticeable. I've actually applied that rule to other parts of my life. If the aroma is delightful, I know that that's exactly what I want. And if it's not so delightful, then probably I won't go there. I think that's probably a good part for the course. By the way, that's exactly what it says on this article. You can go get it. Broken limbs. Some bootleg lines are infamous for having broken limbs. Incorrect default face. This is especially noticeable for Nendoroid figures. Nendoroid. If the figure arrives with the incorrect face on the figurine, i.e. scarred or angry face instead of a neutral face, then it's most likely a bootleg figure. And there's no trademark on the figure. Usually, believe it or not, it'll be on the bottom, on the post, on a statue or something on the very bottom. There'll be a trademark figure. On various Star Trek ships, for instance, there's trademarks usually on the bottom of the saucer or something. So, yeah, an important letter, ladies and gentlemen, an important letter you got to read. You got to be careful. You don't want to buy bootleg figures. Now, this is another letter I really liked, and it's all about toxic fandom. Let's talk toxic fandom again, shall we? Because why not? You can never have too much toxic fandom in your life, as evidenced by, well, YouTube. Right? Am I right? Let's see. Before I read this letter about toxic fandom, which I actually really, really liked. Brandon Valenzuela says the footage for Event Horizon was recently found. Was it? Man, now will somebody pay for that? You know what's great about that is like Jeremy Bolt and Paul Anderson will find the money. I'd love them to put out like an X-rated cut of Event Horizon. I think that'd be amazing. RJW says, thank you for reading my mail. Gentle Giant and Diamond Select both emailed back. Diamond Select said they mimic the original Gentle Giant and Scouting Originals. Thank you. Well, there you go. Look, how great is that? Somebody's giving me real-time feedback as I read their letter. I guess I was right. The Gentle Giant and Diamond Select, you can count on them. So it's not all bad, which is good. That's good. I'm very happy to hear that. So here's a good letter from Patrick Lee. Dear RMB, I love your YouTube show, and it is the morning viewing I make before I trod to work. However, the article you read the other day by Rob Bricken about how nerd culture is broken pissed me off, and pissed me off the whole day. Granted, it is his opinion of the state of fandom about how toxic fans are today. Yes, I admit that there are elements of fans who take it too far in harassing actors for the roles they play. I am of Chinese descent in the Philippines, And my parents and in-laws watch their favorite Chinese or Taiwanese dramas, and they often relate that viewers of those dramas in Taiwan or China verbally abuse or even assault the actors who play villainous characters. Talk about toxic fandom. Now, to him, Rob Bricken, bemoaning how some fans have ruined his love of a particular series or genre due to their hatred of what happened to their favorite characters, we know, and I think most fans know, that we do not own the movie or the TV franchise. We just love the movies and characters. What is pissing us off is how those creators are just tossing aside the concerns of fans of the characters they love. Just look at Star Wars: The Last Jedi. I do not like the film and what they did to the character of Luke Skywalker. I will not list down what I hate about it, but I want to point out the response of Lucasfilm writers to the negative reaction. They said that fanboys who hate are man babies, haters of diversity, bigots, or racists, or hate females. Well, there's an element of truth in all of that. We can see it online, but I understand what you're saying. I mean, who are they to say those kinds of things about other people? I allow other people to say that about themselves. I mean, everybody reveals their own biases. I'm sure people could write a whole list of my biases, beginning with Star Trek Discovery. For that, I tune out. I'm not going to watch Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. I do not need to get pissed off by paying money to watch a film. Life is already doing a great job of pissing me off. Star Wars: The Last Jedi even ruined my viewing of the original Star Wars trilogy Star Wars trilogy. Viewing it would remind me of what happened to Luke. But do not worry, Rob Bricken. I won't bitch and moan about Star Wars anymore because I checked out, and I think I'm not the only one. A close friend of mine, who I've not met for a while, dropped by, and while catching up, we happened to stumble on the topic of Star Wars. He brought it up, not me. He is not a vocal person or a fanatic, but he is sad and disappointed at what happened to Star Wars. He was an avid reader of Star Wars novels and was disgusted at the novel by Chuck Wendig of making Grand Moff Tarkin gay. My friend is gay. He was just surprised why Tarkin's sexuality came up in that novel. Star Wars for me and him was about adventure, fantasy, and having fun, not about gender or the sexuality of a person. Lastly, while surfing on YouTube, I played Luke's theme and was surprised at my reaction of crying tears after hearing this theme. It just reminded me of Luke dying on Achito. Well, you know, I do think it's interesting. You know, the being a Star Trek fan the whole time, I've heard a lot because I grew up with many friends in the LGBTQ community, and I would have that conversation like, why aren't there gay people in Star Trek? And I said, oh, there are. It's just that you just don't know that. They're not focusing on, when they focus on sexuality. Yes, Spock got amok time. Kirk had his females and all of that. But for the most part, you know, it's not like, aside from like, hey, when Kirk pulls his boots on after having his way with Deela in Wink of an Eye, you know, that was about as close as Star Trek ever came to a sex scene like that. It wasn't a part of the show. Like, it wasn't part of the DNA of the show. I don't think that Star Wars necessarily, I get it. Everybody wants to see representation, and which is a good thing. But sometimes there are things where representation, like, there isn't a whole lot of, Star Wars has to be the most chaste big entertainment that I have loved for 40 years. I mean, it's chaste. It's just a chaste thing. And I think that you're right. Your friend's probably right. Even as a gay man, when he finds out in a novel that Tarkin is gay, I wonder, well, that's nice to know, but I think if anything, it distracts from Tarkin's character, knowing that. But I get what Chuck Wendig was trying to do, and he probably did it at the behest of, you know, Disney. Said it's okay, you can have this kind of representation. But I also think that when you're going to delve into any character's sexuality, whether it's straight, gay, bi, transgendered, Octurian, baby, because it don't matter when it's Octurian, right? Whenever you're going to do that, there should be a reason. Like delving into somebody's sexuality should be somehow intrinsic to that character and the plot. Like, for instance, I highly recommend, I mean, not a lot of people are going to dig this, but William Friedkin's Cruising came out. William Friedkin, who directed The Exorcist and, of course, French Connection and To Live and Die in L.A., and he made a film that was very, very controversial when it came out, that was actually based on a novel, and then it was based on a series of real, actual murders. It's sort of a melding of the two stories that took place in the gay underworld in New York City in the 70s. And there was the movie Cruising, which I actually particularly like. My dad took me to see it. Imagine if you ever watch Cruising. By the way, the Arrow Blu-ray that came out in the last month, my God, is it incredible. It is an incredible transfer. The Blu-ray is amazing, and all the supplementary features. When it was being made, this movie was actually shot in real rough trade leather bars. And the gay community in New York was up in arms. And in the documentaries and stuff about Cruising, you find out exactly how up in arms they were, and they made filming very difficult of the film. And that movie, however, it doesn't. Sexuality is a big part of it, of course, but it's really a murder mystery in this world that we just haven't seen really depicted on film like that before. But it was about that world. It was set in that world. You're dropped into this world, so it was intrinsic to the story. And I think, when we're talking about representation is great. And a lot of people think representation is just having people and not calling attention to their gender or their color or their religion or their sexuality. They're just having them there is enough. Certainly, when people talked about Lieutenant Uhura being a Black woman on the bridge of the Enterprise, she was the communications officer. She was part of the command crew. Her very presence meant something at the time. And I get that. I totally get that. But when you're dealing specifically with sexuality, as I've always said, you bring sex scenes in movies, just in general, any sex scene, unless the way people are having sex is somehow intrinsic to the plot, like in Basic Instinct, a sex scene becomes a suspense scene. A lot of the time, intimate moments bring plot to a halt, to a screeching halt, unless it's part of the movie, like in Body Heat or something. And yeah, I mean, I think that representation like that is fine, but in the Star Wars universe, I don't know if sexuality is really a thing. Is it? I think it's distracting. I mean, it doesn't matter who it is, but it's interesting that a gay man would object to Tarkin being gay, because what you're doing is, by saying that, you then go, okay, well, I want to know if Grand Moff Tarkin's gay. When did he come out? And then I want to know, what's the gay lifestyle like in the Star Wars universe? If you're LGBTQ, are there pride parades? Like, does Naboo have pride? Because I bet if they did, it'd be pretty rocking. I mean, can you imagine? You get Amidala's people, and then you Boss Nasp, you get the Gungans, man. You get the Gungans, and I think that would be one hell of a pride parade, man. I would go to that pride parade. But there's a whole a bunch of questions, and to me, if you just announce that some character is gay, it's in a way kind of pandering. I don't think that's helpful, unless, of course, I mean, it would be interesting to read a story about Tarkin growing up gay in the Star Wars universe. That I would read. That would be something that would be really interesting. Did that have any bearing on him getting involved in the military? Was he running away from his parents? Was it like, did Jimmy Summerfield of Bronsky Beat, you leave in the morning with everything, in a little black case? Was he the small town boy that Jimmy Summerfield was singing about in Bronsky Beat's Small Town Boy? Was he? Because if he was, that could be kind of interesting. The sci-fi version of Bronsky Beat's Small Town Boy with Grand Moff Tarkin as the protagonist. I would watch that. That would be awesome. But I think that's my problem. I don't like token diversity. If you're going to deal with diversity, make it diverse. I mean, don't just do it skin deep. Show what that means. If you're really going to get into it, and that's what I like to hear. I want to hear stories about people I don't know, about lifestyles I'm not familiar with, and most of all, the experiences people that are having, growing up. That's why I thought, as a straight man, I thought a movie like Moonlight was really important, because of the way gay characters were portrayed. It was very interesting. I mean, the whole seeing a man's life and different points, I thought was great. But I don't, the representation that we're getting it's such lip service representation. That's what I don't like. And I think it does everybody a disservice. Because if you're putting representation into stories, you're putting your universe, and that goes for diversity. If you're putting your diversity before your characters in your story, you're doing everybody a disservice. That isn't diversity. I want to hear people's stories. I want to hear their experiences. That's what we need. We need to understand so we can understand where they're coming from and who they are. I have to say, yesterday something strange happened to me. Now I gotta look her up to get her name right. But I watched one YouTuber that I've been watching for a long time, who I like, not necessarily agree with, but who I like, attack another YouTuber that I really like. And in her attacks on the YouTuber that I like, I felt personally attacked myself. And I'd never been in that position before. It was maybe I have, but it was always tongue in cheek. This was like really strange to me. And I haven't talked about this. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So there is a YouTuber that I've been watching for years named Karen Straughan. She's Straughan, and she is a men's rights activist. And I started watching her years ago. And I haven't watched her much lately, but I started watching her years ago. I've subscribed to her videos just because the men's rights issue, when it was big a while ago, I was interesting. I follow a lot of interesting stuff. So as you know, another one of my favorite YouTubers is Natalie Wynn, ContraPoints. And I really like Natalie Wynn. Natalie Wynn is trans, and she has documented her transition to becoming a woman over on her YouTube channel. Now, Natalie Wynn was also a former PhD student, and she was in academia, and she's very smart. And I really like her YouTube videos. And when I watch Natalie Wynn, I understand it's theater as well. She's making good points, but she's also being entertaining. She's bringing her philosophical background, her background as an academic. Also, she's adding filmmaking and caricature, and she does a lot of interesting stuff. Well, Karen Straughan, Natalie Wynn did a video called Men, and Karen Straughan went after her and went after her points of view. And I watched this. And Karen Straughan even went after her production value, Natalie Wynn's production value. And I was watching this, and I'm like, okay, here's a woman's men activist who I have liked. Smart woman. Then there's Natalie Wynn, who's a trans woman, who's also very smart, whose videos I've also liked. And I've been listening to their points of view for quite some time. And I was watching Karen really ripping into Natalie. And I was like, I understand where Karen was coming from, and she was making some salient points, but also, she did come off as being jealous of Natalie Wynn's production values. Hell, I'm jealous of Natalie Wynn's production values, her costumes, the way she's setting things up and doing things. And I was like, it was really interesting. It was really strange for me because I was watching these two people whose opinions I respect and who I've been watching literally for years. One of them was tearing the other one apart. And I'm like, but you're not taking into consideration that Natalie is not just trying to be an intellectual. She's also being entertaining, and it was just weird. And I was seeing both of them are fighting for different kinds of representation. And both of them have done, I think, a good job at fighting for that kind of representation. And watching one try and tear the other up, I'm like, wow. It was just really weird to respect both of these YouTubers, both of these people, and I've respected their opinions from afar, and watching them go after each other. It was very odd. And I didn't like it. I was like, what's interesting is I would much rather watch these two in a room together having conversations, because I think everybody would learn a lot. But it seemed needless. It seemed like, why are you bullying Natalie Wynn because of her YouTube channel? I felt like she was really being bullied by Karen Straughan. But now I they don't know me. So anyway, I don't know what that all means, but hey, you just never know what I'm going to talk about here on Robservations. I don't know what I'm going to talk about half the time. So anyway, we'll see what people have to say. So anyway, I'm glad that we brought this up. Let's see. Orville Nation says, "Hey Rob, love your channel." Well, Orville Nation, I hope you still love my channel after that little digression, but thank you. Phil Wen says, "Got my 3D Blu-ray of Endgame yesterday, Rob. I love it. I too love my 3D Blu-ray of Endgame, mostly because it finally arrived. Which is good. I was happy about that. Let's see. But in terms of hate, in terms of this online hate, like I started out saying, there's so much good stuff to concentrate on. Like, I bought the special edition Blu-ray of Last Jedi. I've got it. I've got the 3D version. I got the 4K version. I've got it. Now, the funny thing about it is, here's what I don't get. And again, I always go back to the James Bond franchise. There are a lot of Bond. I hated Spectre. I like the opening scene though, but Spectre, it seemed to me like, what is happening in this movie? Why is this movie so damn boring? It's like I felt that way about View to a Kill, but I love the Bond franchise. And I guess maybe because it's been so long, it's been running so long, that even when I dislike a Bond movie, there's still enough in it that I like. But Star Wars, it's weird to people keep hammering on these movies. I mean, in 10 years, what's really going to be interesting, in 10 years, people are going to watch Solo, like the next generation they're not going to know. It's just like now. I've watched the progression of Star Trek, and I've watched the progression of Star Wars from the time, well, not Star Trek all the way back, but from the early 70s, Star Wars from the time it first existed. And I've watched the progression of all this stuff happen. And so I know that there's the good with the bad. And I think Star Wars is in a particular phase right now. That's why I look at The Mandalorian and I can be, wow, I'm really excited for that, because I think The Mandalorian, from the way it was conceived, could end up being great with all the talent involved. And I think it could be the kind of Star Wars that I want. By the way, just as an aside, Hot Toys did announce a Gonk Droid Jawa 2-pack, if you're interested. But I do think that the vitriol, the extreme vitriol is strange to me, because I guess because I've seen so many different franchises come and go. You take the good with the bad, and yeah, if a movie ends up being disappointing, and again, because I've gone after Star Trek Discovery right now, maybe I shouldn't be talking like this, but I do think that it'll get better. Things will change. Maybe the next one will be better, as Ed Wood said. That's why I go into every movie hoping it's going to be better. I mean, I like Last Jedi better than I liked Force Awakens, because I liked what they were doing with Luke, not necessarily because it subverted expectation, but because I felt that there was some verisimilitude in where Luke was at. He was a burnout, disillusioned guy. And if that was a movie about a criminal, and it wasn't a Star Wars movie, people have been like, yeah, that was great. But no, it wasn't. But I mean, I enjoyed the look. Now, this is I'm going to end with, I started this with a letter from Jeffrey Mao, and I'm going to end this chat with a letter from Jeffrey Mao. It's the Jeffrey Mao show, but this is a good letter. So Jeffrey Mao is taking us full circle today. Hey, Rob, Viscount of Verisimilitude. I know it's Viceroy, but I like Viscount better. Is it Viscount? Viscount? Visconti? Viscount? I said Viscount. But as I'm looking at it, is the S silent? Anyway, I know it's Viceroy, but I like Viscount better. I appreciate your reading my letter from yesterday, and also I appreciate your understanding of the points that I was trying to make. Permit me, if you will, my indulgence in continuing that thought when it comes to thinking about what exactly is it that we are reading when we read a novel. By the way, Jeffrey Mao's letter yesterday, the philosophical underpinnings of the reality of what we're seeing on screen, was very interesting. And you know what? If I was going to Lola's every Sunday night getting ripped with my friends, it would be one of these long drunk, and we'd get there like 7, and when they close at 2, we'd still be talking about it. It was that kind of a thing. This is really interesting, though. He's following it up. What do we read on the printed page? When we think about what we are reading, when we read, well, it's just words on a page. The words are put together in such a way as to be understandable by the reader as language. This makes books, or more generally, literature, far easier than audiovisual entertainment for the author to present, control, and manipulate the perspective, information, and meaning of his or her story. The author can provide as much or as little as he wants. For a movie, everything shown within the frame is available for the viewer to take in. Of course, the director can focus the gaze as much as possible, but everything is available, including the lighting, the blocking, the colors, the background, the costumes, the setting, the expressions on the actors' faces, everything that is not a part of the script or actual action. Everything combines into a language of movies that is far more complex and multi-layered than books. Does that make books less sophisticated? Far from it. It's just a different medium. Books provide the author many advantages. He can tell the reader exactly what he wants, and more importantly, what he doesn't want. Within one page, he can jump ahead in time in ways that would be confusing, if not infuriating, for a movie. By choosing specific points of view, he can control the narrative and keep the reader guessing. Perhaps the most prominent current author who utilizes the advantages of the written word to full effect is George R.R. Martin and his series A Song of Ice and Fire. Part of the challenges of adapting the series into Game of Thrones was that with a visual medium, many of Martin's tricks and secrets could not be brought over. Lack of information and slowness of communication are utilized to make us think or assume things about characters and events when they are or could be quite different. Scores of different theories have come about trying to piece together clues that Martin has scattered throughout the books. The Order of the Green Hand YouTube channel is quite good at coming up with many. Keep in mind that most famous theory, that being R plus L equals J, was also put together in the same manner. They have theorized that the events of the Tower of Joy are not what they seem. The Kingsguard members there were not killed, but went to join either the Night's Watch or the Wildlings in disguise. It was part of a conspiracy to cover up what did and didn't happen there. They theorize that Mance Rayder is actually Sir Arthur Dane, Choran Halfhand is Sir Oswald Went, and Tormund is Gerald Hightower. Their other theories are that Jon Snow is indeed Ned Stark's bastard son and that Ashara Dane is his mother. They also theorize that Ashara is not dead, as is stated in the books, but in disguise as a septa who accompanies Tyrion, young Griff, John Connington, and company in Essos. Also, that Rhaegar and Lyanna did have a son who did not turn out to be Jon, but is young Griff. So that is their theory. Young Griff is indeed the trueborn Aegon VI Targaryen, the son of Rhaegar, and the legitimate heir to the Iron Throne. However, he is not the Aegon who is the son of Rhaegar and Elia Martell, as that Aegon was indeed killed by the Mountain during the sack of King's Landing. The babies were switched at some point. That's a lot of theorizing for me. Are you confused yet? In any other book series, such theorizing would be considered insane, but given the number of acknowledged identity issues in the series, then any additional theorizing must be considered part and parcel. The entire core theme of the series is that no one is who they seem to be, or who they are told to be, or who they are thought to be. Robert Baratheon's children are not his own, which is the basis for the entire War of the Five Kings. Jon Snow is not who he thinks he is. Jaime Lannister is not just the Kingslayer. Tyrion is not just the imp. Barristan Selmy disguises himself when he journeys to Essos. Varys is a master of disguise. Melisandre can glamour herself up to look like a young woman. Melisandre glamours a fake Mance Rayder, who is then executed in place of the real Mance Rayder. Mance then disguises himself as a bard to go on an undercover mission in Winterfell. Sansa masquerades as Jen Poole in The Vale. A fake Arya is married to Ramsay Bolton. Real Arya becomes no one in Bravos. I could go on and on. Martin uses the limited perspectives of POV characters to full effect, with the lack of complete information, slowness or failure in communication, and sometimes unreliable narration combining to make the reader work hard to fully grasp what is actually going on. Unlike in movies, there's no God's eye authoritative objective viewpoint. Even descriptions of characters vary from one perspective to another. An event that is observed by one character can be exaggerated, conflated, and distorted when heard about by another. Many of the aspects of A Song of Ice and Fire that make it beloved by its fans tend to get lost in the TV adaptation, in some ways necessarily so. Because of the move to a visual medium, many of the disguises, masquerades, and identity issues caused by certain characters just plain not knowing what another person looks like are not doable if the point is to fool the character and the reader, viewer both. Now, if we're in on it, that's another story. It's clear that both media, the visual and the verbal, have their advantages and disadvantages from a storytelling point of view. It's up to the writer to decide and to understand how best to utilize the tools in his toolbox to tell the story that he wants in the best way possible. Thanks, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Well, Jeff, to be honest, I only ever read the very first Game of Thrones novel when it first came out, and I was the critic at large for Sci-Fi Universe magazine. Sci-Fi, one of the great things about writing for a magazine that got books is they would get sent every science fiction or horror or fantasy novel that came out, and they just would stack up, and Mark Altman would say, just take what you want, no one else is. And I'm like, all right. And I took Game of Thrones because I was already a George R.R. Martin fan. One of my favorite books of the 80s, early 80s, was his Vampire on the Mississippi novel, Fever Dream. And I had been a George R.R. Martin fan because of Beauty and the Beast and because a lot of his short stories, and mostly because of the Wild Cards Mosaic novels. If you haven't read Wild Cards and you like superheroes, those are good. Melinda Snodgrass is apparently working on the TV series. Good stuff. But, you know, the difference between books and movies is always, I mean, look, when you're reading a book, the setting has to be described in words. And the more evocative a writer's language, the more immersed you are in the story. That's why I love, one of my favorite books in terms of the language. And again, I've only read it once, so maybe I'm looking back on it with rose-colored glasses, but Donna Tartt's The Secret History, I was completely immersed. Stephen King does such a great job of evoking times and places. And that all has to be done with words. Now, when you're making a film, one establishing shot tells you everything you need to know. If your story is taking place in suburbia, if you see Carrie White's house, you get it. You get where Carrie White lives. One shot. A good author might take pages to set the stage, to set the setting, and has to use language organized in such a way that they draw you in. And it's still storytelling, but everything that you see, it's really interesting. Screenwriting is this way. When you are a deft screenwriter, only tells you what you see. The descriptive paragraphs just tell you what you see. And those usually, they're quick. No more than 4 sentences long, usually. A descriptive paragraph, usually shorter. Maybe they're 1 or 2 sentences. Good screenwriting is very staccato. It's very rapid fire. And then you have what the characters are saying. And when you're reading a book, again, there's so much language used, so you have to explain everything, in different directions. When you describe a street in a book, you have to know what kind of a street it is. How wide is the street? How is it bordered by flowers or trees? Are there other houses on the street? There's all of these things that a writer could spend pages describing that one shot will do in a movie. Everything you need to know is in an image. But what is an author doing? But an author is painting images in your imagination using language. But a good writer is keeping you just as entertained as a movie does. A great writer, like when you read Stephen King, people have talked about, I remember reading things about how Stephen King was like the McDonald's of novelists. Well, I don't necessarily think that's true, because good writing that is immersive, writing that gets you involved, it doesn't necessarily have to be using lots of big words or long. You don't need to be some vocabulary master to write a great story. And Stephen King has a way of, in a way, you forget you're even reading a Stephen King story when his best work is so relatable, and his language and the way he tells stories and gets into people's heads. I love evocative language. I've always loved evocative language, and that's why I read so much. There's nothing better than you sit down with an author and it's like having somebody talk to you for 2 hours on YouTube. No, just kidding. I wish I could speak the way some authors write, but that takes a great deal of work. But it's interesting. Writing is just a different discipline, and the great writers, your favorite writers, are just as evocative as our great filmmakers, and that's why we run out and get their books. There are certain writers, I have every one of their books on the wall. And sometimes it's not even the writing necessarily. Sometimes I just like the concepts. Jonathan Mayberry, I think, is a really great writer. But he's a great writer of genre fiction. I can't speak to, I've never read, if Jonathan Mayberry wrote the great American novel like The Great Gatsby. I haven't read that. I don't know what his writing's like there. I read his Joe Ledger novels religiously. Once a year, I get a Jonathan Mayberry book about the Department of Military Sciences, which, by the way, was destroyed. So there's a new unit, and there's a new group. Oh, sorry, spoiler alert. If you want to get into the Jonathan Mayberry books, Deep Silence didn't end well for anybody involved, just so you know, which was great. But yeah, I mean, language is very evocative. It's just a different discipline. And also, you're asking your reader, not only does the author have the job of dealing with all this complexity, but a reader too. I think a lot of people don't read books because they didn't learn how. And I don't mean they didn't learn how to read. I mean, have you ever tried to give somebody a comic book or a manga, a graphic novel of any kind, and they've never really read comics before? I've seen people literally push back. They don't know how to read a comic book. They don't understand. They do not, because they don't have the skill yet. You can teach them, but it's like a different language. Following art sequentially and reading thought bubbles and things like that, it's not for everyone. And there are some people that just don't have the imaginations to sit down and read books and become immersed in them. They never learned. That's a skill. I think that's a teachable skill too. But it's a skill that not a lot of people pick up. If you don't pick it up as a kid, if you're not into books when you're a kid, if you're not into reading as a kid, you're not going to be into reading as an adult. I guess you can find your way into it, but it's a skill. It is a skill, because you have to be able to open up your brain, open up your imagination. And there are a lot of people, like my mom is an incredibly pragmatic woman. She doesn't have a lot of time. I mean, I always see that there's like a couple of books in the house, but I don't think I've ever had a conversation with my mother about a novel she read, not my whole life. And that's not a criticism of her. She's just a pragmatist. She's like, she'd rather watch golf. Golf's like her religion. She likes golf because golf's really happening. And I don't see that my mom has a lot of use for flights of fancy. I mean, she goes to the movies occasionally, mostly because of me. But people there, and that doesn't mean they're bad people or less intelligent. They're just people that aren't into it. People that like movies much better. I grew up thinking both were kind of the same thing. For me, it was comic books, movies, television, and novels. They all carried, actually, of all those things, television carried the least amount of weight, because when I was growing up, as much as I loved Star Trek and the Twilight Zone, that was it. Most of the rest of TV, I was like, if it's not Outer Limits or Star Trek or Twilight Zone or a movie on Sci-Fi Theater, I had no use for it. So it was movies were first. Movies, books, comics, music, like albums. I was one of those guys going, you can't listen to Pink Floyd's The Wall unless you listen to all four sides of it when it was an LP. So, what George R.R. Martin can do with his storylines, the same thing that Tolkien can do, create these amazing tapestries and all that, imagine that kind of stuff. It's amazing. But yeah, it's a different discipline. It's a different thing. I mean, theorizing, when people are theorizing things, what's interesting, whether it's Star Wars theories, there's that channel, isn't it? Star Wars theories, it's a channel, I think. These theories are I wish that most of the fan theories turned out to be true, the better fan theories, because the fans have spent a lot more time thinking about and contemplating the way these stories are going than the people that are actually making stories these days. That's not true all the time, but it's true a lot of the time. But anyway, once again, Jeff, thank you for your letters today. Phil Wen says, I remember a time when films like Titanic would take a year before being released on home video. Strange to think that Endgame is on video in 3 months. Yes, I mean, there were a long time. Now, there's a reason for that, because the home video release, at first, at the dawn of the video era, which seems sort of strange, there was all this talk. Hollywood was pushing back against home video. They thought for sure that home video was going to be the death of movie theaters. Well, I'm here to tell you, there's something else. Not the afterworld. A world of never-ending home video releases. You can always see the sun. No, the What home video did was it turned the entire planet into movie fanatics. More so than ever before, movies were available. People could run out and get them. Even home video was special. Before the internet, before you could just download whatever file you wanted, going out to the video store was an event. You could take a date there. You could, for your family outing, could go there, and picking a movie had a bit of magic in it. Had a bit of magic, and that's the one thing about the end of the video store era is that now movies are taken for granted. Now you can just hit a button and then they show up. Boom. There's no effort being put in anymore, so movies are ubiquitous. So people are like, I'll get around to it. You know, we all grew up in a time when movies were magic and they were special. And that year-long video window was there because, you know, they wanted to make as much money in movie theaters as possible, because movies only had their theater life and then they'd go to TV or cable or something. But with home video, changed. And then, of course, DVD, the popularity of the DVD medium, it became the most successful home electronics device in the history of humanity. Everybody had DVD, and people couldn't buy DVDs fast enough. So it really changed the world. And that model, what they want to do is, movies are so expensive now, and the home video windows have gotten so much shorter because, remember, studios don't just have coffers full of money that they can just, well, I'm Warner Brothers, I'm just going to go into my vault and take out $200 million to make Batman v Superman to market it or whatever. That's not how it works. You know, they have to pay back a bank to borrow that money. Tallulah's barking, and that, my friends, brings me to the end of Robservations number 225. Robservations is, of course, the show about something. I am Robert Meyer Burnett. I am your host. I am your Viscount of verisimilitude. No, I'm the Viceroy of verisimilitude and your bringer of fun and wonder. And thank you for being here. I want to thank my moderators, Terry, the Sheriff of Nottingham from the UK, Detective Jim, Greg Smith, the man who can build a house with his bare hands, and, of course, Mayor Mike Bodden of Riverdale, Iowa. And, of course, Gilbert and Tallulah are always here. I want to thank everybody who supports the channel through super chats or through writing letters to the website. Go to the website. You can join up. You can become an imagination connoisseur and support the channel for $1 a year. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, you can. And that is at the Burnettwork.net. All the letters I read today are up at the Burnettwork.net. Share them with your friends. Share them with your family. There's over 800 letters and pieces of content on the Burnettwork.net. So check that out. Apparently somebody's here and Tallulah is barking at them. But anyway, I want to say thanks. And, I'll be back tomorrow. And of course, as I always do, remember, I say, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. You know what else you have to do? You got to go hit like or subscribe to this channel if you want me to keep going. Get those YouTube analytics up. So thank you very much. And as always, Gilbert and Tallulah are here. But I say to you, have a better day. Why you guys got to do